Ida from Flash Fiction Mystery Quilts. Today I'm going to show you how to quilt a basic free motion quilt. I will show you everything you need to do, all the settings you need to have on your sewing machine, and I'll show you a basic squiggle free motion quilt pattern, which is my go-to for just about every quilt I make. Let's get started. The next thing we want to do is set up our sewing machine. So mine is set up now, and I have my darning foot or free motion foot for my particular quilt. I'm sorry, I'm shaking the camera. For my particular machine, it's called a darning foot, but it will be an open-toed, bouncy. It will bounce if it needs to. Little foot on there. I have a silicone mat called a Super Slider, I believe. I just got from Amazon. I have my feet dropped, and that setting is under my machine. And I have my machine set to free motion quilting, which is over here. And I then always recommend doing a test block and checking your tension. So let's sew a little bit of a test squiggle and look at the tension up close. Before you free motion anything, always make a test. I just have a little test quilt sandwich because you'll need to test your tension. So down here, as you see, the top threads are pulling through to the bottom, and up here the bottom threads are pulling through to the top. So I want my tension to be like this, exactly in the center, and that is why you always make a test quilt sandwich, so that you can see where your tension is set for your particular fabric that you're using. So we're going to do that right now. And I'm just going to sew. I'm not doing free motion as I would on a quilt, which I'll be showing you in just a minute. I am strictly just doing this to test the tension. And I'm just going to sew a little path, moving my fabric around, and then I will stop and we'll look at it. I always use Wonderfill thread for my quilting. So that is my top. And let's see what this looks like on the back side, because on the front there's nothing pulling through. The back side is not pulling through. And this line right here is the one I just sewed. There is nothing from the top thread pulling, so I don't see any loops anywhere on this. Let's see if we can. There you go. Well, this is a variegated thread, so it is going to change colors as you move through. If I were to see my top threads pulling through, I would need to tighten or turn my tension up. If on the back, if it's on the front and I see the bottom threads pulling through, then I need to loosen my tension. Once you have your tension set to where it's in the middle, then you're going to be ready to quilt. This is the back side of my fabric or my backing, and this is where my top thread is pulling through, and you can see there's not really a pretty stitch there, and so I had to adjust my tension tighter on my top thread, and then you have pretty stitches. Can you see the difference? Now my top thread always looked right, but it's my back side that did not let's see, there it is. So you see the top thread looks okay. It's just the back thread that did not. So that's why you always want to pull it out, look at it and go, that is not right. You want really pretty stitches in and out all the way through. I am ready to start quilting. I like to use these quilting gloves because they have sort of rubberized ends and they help me move my fabric through the machine. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my quilt under the machine, and I'm going to find the center of the quilt. You always start in the center and move out. Never start at the ends, because you will end up with a unsquare quilt that has buckles in your backing. So I'm going to count my squares. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The center of my quilt is right here. So that will be where I start. So my thread has a purple tint. I'm going to start on this pink so that the area that I start on does not, the actual location doesn't show through. So to pull up your threads, you're going to drop your needle down just like this, and then pull it back up like so. I like to hold on to my thread from both sides, and I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread. There it is. So now I have bobbin thread right here, and I have my top thread. And I'm going to put my foot down, and I'm going to lock my stitch or sew a few stitches right in the same place while holding on to both of my threads. So let's do that right now. All right, so this is now locked in place and ready to start free motion quilting. I'll put my little gloves on. It just helps me move. And then there are stipple patterns. Again, I don't use them. I just squiggle my way through as if I was doodling on a piece of paper. I'll put my little quilting gloves on, and these are not expensive. They are worth their weight in gold when you're moving a quilt through your domestic machine. I do not have a long arm, so I don't have room for one. So I do everything on my domestic. I'm going to make sure everything is nice and flat under here, and then I'm going to make my hands sort of like a H shape, make a box, and that's going to be the area that I'm going to quilt in. I start off slow at first, and then later on I speed up as I go. So I'm just going to draw squiggles on my quilt. If you need to reposition your hands, that's really easy to do. You just stop with your needle down and put your hands where you want them again. And I'm going to just look up underneath here at my quilting and see how it looks under there. Just to make sure that my tension is perfect, and it still is, so we can move on. And as you see, my little pattern went like this. And again, I am just drawing squiggles. So I'm going to move up here, move my hands nice and tight, and continue. Premotion quilting is all about the speed of your hands and the speed of the needle to get good size stitches that look nice. So you just have to literally practice, practice, practice on that. It does not just usually come to people. It is something that requires a whole lot of practicing on practice quilt sandwiches. As you can see, I'm moving my hands, and I'm going to keep going because you have to move your hands as you go, and I'm not one that can move my hands while the quilt is actually being sewn, so I stop and I start. So if you need to stop and walk away or get a drink or anything, you can just stop, leave your needle down, and then come back to it. Periodically flip your quilt over, look at your back stitching to make sure that it that the tension doesn't need to be adjusted. Most of the time it will not, but if it does, it's always a good idea to keep an eye on that. Depending on what your quilt is made of, I have applique squares and I have pineapple blocks. So depending on what it's made of, it may feel differently going through different fabric layers, and that's fine. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. It just means that different fabrics or different, it change the way that it feels going through. And if you noticed, I slowed down my quilting speed because, bless my heart, I cannot quilt and talk. I'm going to stop and readjust my hands. And then just keep moving on. Always keep your hands and your quilt nice and tight and flat as you're free motion quilting. And you just continue on, making squiggles all over. If possible, try not to cross over a line that you've already sewn. It's not the end of the world if you do. Trust me, nobody will see any errors that you made. Once your quilt is washed, it just will be beautiful. I have made my way all the way from the outside of the inside of the quilt where I started to the outside, and I'm continuing to sew. And so let's just video a little of this so that you can get an idea more about the movement and the speed. the end of where I had quilted before, I'm going to lock my stitch, and then I'm going to start again down below. So locking my stitch will just keep it from coming undone. And this is my last strip that I have to do, this one right down here. And so I'm going to do how I started before. I'm just going to find a place. I'm going to drop my needle, sort of in a seam, pull it back up, and then I'm going to pull my bobbin thread up, like so, grab it, and now I have both my threads out, and I'm just going to put my needle back down where I did before, had my needle in, and I'm going to take, I don't know, about 4, maybe 5 stitches to lock it in. And then I can start sewing again. I always start off slow, and then you can pick up speed as you go. Now, if you're sewing on a batik, you will notice that there's more needle noise as it goes through the fabric, and that's perfectly okay. And that's because batiks have that finish from when they are dyed on them. So it's just not a really easy fabric for the needle to go through, but again, it's perfectly okay. So don't panic if you hear that sort of pounding noise. One other thing you want to watch out for is to always make sure that your end is not folded up underneath your fabric. I've done that before, so that's the reason I know to watch for it and keep my fabric always completely flattened out as I'm free motion quilting. So let's keep going. You can watch for a few more minutes and then I'll just stop this video.